go through the trauma not only of a long journey, but also then of being placed with sponsors here in the United States while they await their court hearing in immigration court. The human smugglers who smuggle people across the border don't care anything about the people, including these children. They consider them to be a commodity, like drugs or anything else they can make money from. And they understand our laws very well because they exploit them on a regular basis, again, for a profit. And one consequence of flooding the border with unaccompanied children is that the Border Patrol, rather than stopping illegal drugs and other contraband, human trafficking across the border, they are occupied with the care and custody of these children for up to 72 hours, ideally, before they then hand them off to Health and Human Services and then the Office of Refugee Relocation that works with Catholic Charities. But what that means when the Border Patrol is off the front line, then the criminal organizations that smuggle people and smuggle drugs, then they have an opening they can run through to get more of the illegal drugs into the United States. Last year alone, there were 80,000 Americans who died of drug overdoses. About 20% of that is heroin that comes from, 92% of that comes from Mexico. So this is really a tragic set of circumstances, and I know everybody involved is trying to do the very best they can under very difficult circumstances, ranging from the Border Patrol that are completely overwhelmed. You've seen the Border Patrol stations where children are packed in like sardines. They're supposed to be processed within 72 hours, but now because of a lack of facilities to place these children with Health and Human Services, they get stacked up for days on end in those very difficult conditions, even in the midst of a pandemic, where obviously they're not social distancing. And of course, many of them had not been tested or know whether they are positive or spreading the virus, which is another complication. But the Border Patrol then hands them off to Health and Human Services that does an outstanding job. Again, I'm not here to criticize any of the people who are trying to help. It's almost like everybody is working together in the neighborhood to put out a fire, but the fire is overwhelming the capacity of the neighborhood to put it out. But then the ultimate step is placing these children with the help of Catholic Charities in this intermediate step with the sponsor in the United States. Hopefully a biological relative, but not always. And one of the questions I've had is what is the vetting process and the follow-up process? I know Catholic Charities is the gold standard when it comes to the services they provide, but I worry that there are others that are providing this service that do not follow up, do not vet those sponsors, and the dangers you can imagine of additional trauma associated with that placement with a non-relative that happens to be a sponsor is that the potential is there, and that concerns me very much. So finally, let me just say what the Border Patrol tells me is that there's two things we really need to think about. We need to think about the violence and the poverty that people are fleeing. That's the push factor, as they call it, together with the incentive of the smugglers to make money with their human cargo. So this is part of their business enterprise, along with the pull factors, which is the perception of how easy it is to make it into the United States and stay. And that's where the policies that are passed by the United States Congress are important, and where I'm working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to try to come up with policies that will give people an opportunity to have their hearing in front of an immigration judge while they are still being processed, rather than to release them with a notice to appear, with 1.2 million backlogged cases in immigration courts, which obviously is not creating a disincentive for people to continue to come into the United States, because they understand that if they can make it here, that they'll probably get to stay here. And that's an enormous pull factor that we need to balance out in order to make this, I think, a safer and more humane process. So let me stop there, and I'll answer a couple questions. Or Bob, should I turn it over to you?
Yeah, I'll go and then we can do questions if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Bob Sanborn, I'm President and CEO of Children at Risk. We've done a lot of work on the border with kids since 2014, when we had the first surge of children in the spring, 60,000 kids at that point. then they get here, and they have to come, in some cases, to shelters like what they see at Catholic Charities. And so we certainly applaud Catholic Charities for the big heart that they have for children. But a lot of work needs to be done in this area. Our hope, right, is that we understand that most of these children are coming here, and they have family members in the United States. And our hope is to reunite them with those family members as quickly as possible. And if and when they stay in shelters, that they could be in shelters like what we have here at Catholic Charities, but that it become a very quick stopover so that post-haste we see these children reunited with their families. We are a country that cares about family, and who better to take care of these traumatized children and get them back to normal than to get them to their families. And so our hope is that we act very quickly and that they're not caught up in bureaucratic red tape, and that they're sent to reunite with their families. You may have seen some of these stories. They're coming across. They have their numbers. They have letters. They know exactly the addresses of their parents, their mom or dad that's here, or an aunt or an uncle. And so we want to see that happen quickly. We applaud the senator on doing legislation on this, right? Because we need bipartisan legislation to make this work. And I think that sometimes we refer to this crisis on the border. Indeed, it's a crisis of immigration. And we want to make sure that we have bigger solutions to this than what we're seeing on the border. And we applaud the senator for taking leadership, because we need that leadership in Washington, D.C., so that both sides of the aisle can come together and work on this very important issue. Alguna palabra para la prensa latina. Estamos hablando de este problema que tenemos en la frontera. Y hay un problema en la frontera con todos estos niños que podemos ver ahí, pero la problema es más grande en Washington, porque necesitamos leyes para inmigración, para que todos tenemos éxito en este país, y para que tenemos niños que pueden venir aquí, y cuando llegan, que muy rápidamente están con sus familias. Es una cosa muy, muy importante. I'll finish up by saying that that for us, it's all about children. These aren't Republicans or Democrats, these little kids. They're just kids. And we need to take care of these kids, get them to their families as quickly as possible. And I think everyone here is sort of on that same page. Take care of our children. Senator? And we'll take questions.
Senator, I want to talk about the poll factor.
Yeah.
And while you were in Ghana on Friday with, I think, almost 20% of the United States Senate, 19, there was a Democratic delegation in Carrizo Springs. Ilhan Omar spoke there, the congresswoman from Minnesota. She said, from her perspective as a former refugee, that she believes that parents in Central America, because of conditions there, are doing the responsible thing, sending their children north for a chance at life. Now, in terms of the messaging, is that counterproductive? Is that dangerous? Is that sending the wrong message?
Well, I take it as a given that people want to come to the United States. Thank goodness people want to come to the United States. Legal immigration has been part of the secret sauce for the United States' success. And we want to continue to be the most welcoming nation in the world when it comes to legal immigration. We naturalize about 1 million people a year. But what is a disaster is the kind of uncontrolled immigration in the hands of criminal organizations that reap great profit from it, and that also import things like the drugs that I mentioned earlier, heroin, fentanyl, methamphetamine. This killed 80,000 Americans last year, just drug overdoses alone. So I don't know anybody in their right mind who would think that the status quo is acceptable. We need to find a way to humanely and legally allow immigration to occur, but we can't just put the welcome mat out for anybody and everybody in the world who wants to come to the United States, because we'll be overwhelmed. And that's what we're seeing happen right now. Yes, ma'am.
Olivia Caleb from the NewsNOW. How would you yourself fix this issue of children coming to the border, hoping that they are going to get in and be united with their families? What would you do?
Well, time and time again, we've seen that a system that's called catch and release is is not a disincentive. It does not send the message that you will not be able to make it into the United States. It conversely will send the message that yes, you will be able to be released, and you're probably not going to return for your court date. So Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Laredo, Texas, and I in 2017 introduced a bill we call the Humane Act, which gives the opportunity for children who come as unaccompanied minors to see an immigration judge, and if they've got a valid case for asylum, then they can get that granted right there. Because as you can see, this process of releasing children to sponsors and the limited resources to follow up, Catholic Charities does wonderful work, but I worry that not every child who's placed with a sponsor, particularly not a family member, there's adequate follow-up or assurance that they're not being trafficked, or that they're not being recruited into a gang, or they're not being abused. And that's, to me, so that's why I think the status quo is not acceptable. We're trying to make the best we can out of a very broken situation. So that's one idea. I'm working with another Democratic senator that hopefully will have a bill that we'll release here in a couple of weeks that will be much along the lines of what Congressman Cuellar and I proposed. Yes, ma'am.
So you mean that when they arrive, the whole process that now is taking even more than a year will be done in a day or a short time?
Our hope is that they would be, before they will be released. That's really the key. But obviously what happens in the interim, right now there's a combination of rules. One involves a lawsuit settlement called the Flores settlement, which requires the Border Patrol to release these children within 72 hours. And with the numbers growing, it's the HHS, the federal government's working hard to keep up with it. That's why you see new facilities being built all across the state and across the country. So if we're able to deal with that on the front end, it gives people with valid claims an opportunity to stay once the judge grants it. I think that is one way to reduce what I call one of the pull factors. Yes, ma'am.
Senator, if you toured the Catholic Charities shelter, I understand that the location is being kept private for their safety. Could you tell us a little bit about what you saw, what you liked, what you disliked, and the contrast compared to the shelter closer to the border?
Well, it's a night and day. What we saw along the border is people literally walking to the Border Patrol to turn themselves in because they realize that they are likely to be released. If they're a child, of course, they're going to be processed as we go through a process we've already described. But by and large, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, a public health epidemic, many people continue to come that are not tested or are tested and they don't have a place to keep them, so they are released into the interior of the United States to spread more of the virus. What I saw at the border, where they are literally being overwhelmed and they have hundreds of people in facilities designed to hold basic, well, I think in the Donna facility, they had well over 700 or maybe 4,000, excuse me, in a facility that's only designed to handle a couple of hundred. And in a COVID crisis. So our Border Patrol, HHS, and others are overwhelmed, and like I said, they're doing the best they can. Here, obviously, there's a smaller number of children being helped here, and it's a night and day difference. This is what I would consider to be the gold standard if you're going to have the current system. But I'd like to see that system streamlined and changed and give it an opportunity for people to present their claims promptly rather than be told to come back in months or maybe years later and not return at all. Yes, ma'am.
Senator, on your tour today, interacting potentially with migrant children, did you learn anything about their lives, what they're fleeing, and what conditions are in the shelter you were at today?
Well, I got a chance to see the shelter, and so I got a chance to see for myself what that was like. And some of the children were being taught. They're being provided education with a tutor, a couple of tutors that were there, and had a chance to talk to them briefly about where they came from. A couple from Guatemala and another from Honduras. And primarily this is a Central American phenomenon. But one thing that I think people need to understand, as part of this network, this criminal organization that smuggle people across the border. In Del Rio a few weeks ago, when I was there with Henry Cuellar, the Border Patrol chief said that just so far this year, they had detained people from 54 different countries. 54 different countries. So this is not just limited to Mexico and Central America. This is a global phenomenon with criminal networks that will smuggle people for the right price. If you go down to Hebronville, at the checkpoint, the internal checkpoint there, where the coyotes will dump the migrants out before they get to the checkpoint and tell them, we'll meet you on the north side. And unfortunately, some of them, particularly in hot weather, don't make it because they're already suffering from exposure. But you'll see rescue beacons there, and which is if the migrants are sick or they're worried about not being able to make it, they can go call the Border Patrol by hitting this rescue beacon. The first language is in Spanish, which didn't surprise me. The second language is in Chinese, which did surprise me. So this is not just, I think sometimes we look at this like we're looking through a soda straw. This is part of a larger and dangerous phenomenon, and which means we need to take the money out of the human smuggling business and not encourage it, and we need to have some orderly movement of people across our borders rather than just open borders.
Time for one more question.
Senator, do you
Yes.
know if any of these children were caught with contraband coming across the border?
I'm not aware. I don't believe the children are generally carrying contraband. What happens is the Border Patrol is diverted because they have to take care of the children. They come off the front lines. Then the people with contraband, with backpacks full of narcotics, will use that gap, sort of like an opposing line in a football game. Once the front line clears the front line, then the backfield runs through and scores a touchdown. And in this case, unfortunately, that's where the cartels that smuggling drugs will use this diversionary tactic by overwhelming the Border Patrol in order to move those drugs into the United States.
Senator, do you know, quick question, do you know when these shelters started operating here in Houston?
I'm sure we could get a good answer for you here. I don't know the specifics. I know you've been here a long time.
Over
20 years, but they've handled surges and ups and downs for 20 years. Thank goodness for them. Thank you.
We're gonna head over that way after we thank our host. Okay. And then Bob, can you visit my job for a few minutes? Sorry.
No, we're going to take one photograph with you guys. So Cynthia, once we get your photograph.